Okay, I think we're ready to start here. Fifth round of the Tuesday night marathon, live in downtown San Francisco at the Mechanics Institute. And we've had a very active week here at the club this weekend. There was a tremendous tournament, the William Addison Memorial. Almost 100 people here, international masters, and lots of our regulars, along with people from all over the Bay Area, and some really exciting chess. So that's really good because I do some fantastic positions that I want to show you. Magnus and some of the other world top 10 will be starting in a couple of days in a Grand Cup tour in Croatia. But meanwhile, we've been entertaining the world of chess right here. So we'll start with something from the fifth round of the William Addison Memorial. It was international master Vince McCambridge against Ethan I, who's a young up-and-coming player who had the black pieces. So they started out with a queen's pawn game, and it quickly transposed into a queen's gambit accepted when black took the pawn on c4. So it's always dangerous to try to hold on to this pawn, and young Ethan didn't. You just let white recapture the pawn, but black needs to develop his pieces so that he gets a balance. And uses his c-pawn to attack the center. This has all been played this way for 100 years. Black develops. White offers a poison queen pawn because black would fall too far behind in development if he takes it. So Ethan just develops. Vince McCambridge also develops. Pawn to a6 to cover some squares on the queen. And now McCambridge plays a little bit of a slow move. People like Alyekin would just put the rook on the D line, maybe looking for a break right away. Vince plays a bit positionally to cover some squares there on the queen side, and theoretically black should be able to equalize after that move, which Ethan advances on the queen side and develops. So now Vince develops the rook to d1, and after bishop e7, he then hits in the center with the classic break of the Queen's Gambit accepted, pawn to d5, since all the white pieces target the d5 square. So Ethan just recaptures as he has to. Knight takes on d5. Black knight takes on d5. Bishop takes on d5. And black castles. And McCambridge then advances with pawn to e4, and he's trying to get just a little advantage in the center. That's the battle. The bishop's aggressively posted. If this one can come out and help, then maybe white will get a real initiative. Ethan covers the e5 square.
Can I ask a beginner's question?
Please?
So the pawn structure is 4 and 2 versus 3 and 3. Both have 2 islands. Is there kind of a principle differential where you prefer one or the other if they're equally advanced?
You might say if you get to an end game, You might like black's pawn structure, that they're on the queen side, and he could get a passed pawn on this side of the board. And white having 4 against 3, you might say he prefers the middle game. So just...
Because it takes more time to get your pass, or at 4 against 3, or is it because they're both on the king side and there's more, it's harder to get a pass on the king side?
Yeah, it's hard to get a passer with advancing all of these up against there, whereas there's more. And if that's an endgame, then it'll favor black. Of course, it'll depend exactly on which pieces, but in general would probably favor black. But the middle game, you've got an extra pawn protecting or advancing, can use that for an attack. So Cambridge now develops the bishop on this C pawn, and Ethan advances it, and Cambridge uses the tempo attacking the rook on F8. So he could play it very safely, rook to D8, but puts the rook on one of the good files, trying to hold up any white central advance, and Cambridge hits him with bishop to D6, which of course the queen can't take because of bishop takes F7 check, winning the queen. So that's okay. Ethan just moved his queen away, and we see both sides have everything developed, and all the action is right there in the center. So now comes pawn to E5, and something's going to happen very quickly. Okay, you can't take the pawn yet. We've got the bishop, knight, and queen defending it. This bishop looks very powerful, but black has placed his pieces very well, all in the center. And he now brings the last one right into play, so he feels ready for any action. And really, white can't stand still. He's advanced, and just some moves, knight A5 or something. He'd maybe like to put this rook over on that square, but that's an illegal move. But okay, he is pushed in the center. He wants to attack, and advances with the queen to E4. So it can go to F5. He's looking at that king side. And it's a dangerous attack if you give him any time at all. But young Ethan comes up with quite a combination here. Plays knight takes E5 in the middle. And, well, that's a piece sacrifice. Bishop takes on E5.
Is it worth showing why he couldn't take bishop takes B7?
Okay, we have a knight. Yeah, bishop takes B7. You're going to run into,
Knight takes F3.
yeah, lots of discoveries. Maybe even this one, but knight takes F3, queen takes F3, and rook takes bishop would get your piece back with a great position. So, yeah, this opens up all the action on these central files. But it looks like white's got it under control, because the knight and the queen, they guard the E5 square, the rook and the bishop, or rook and queen guard the D5 square. Well, I'll show you the next move. Bishop takes E5. You've got some good discovers, check or here. Cambridge recaptures on E5 with the knight. And anyone want to guess the next move for black?
F6. Can't play F6. Bishop takes
I want to take off the d5 bishop.
Yeah.
Is that 7 queen? But
See, if we trade here, bishop, rook takes, you don't want to trade and play f6. If you play f6 here,
It's queen takes.
yeah, maybe rook takes, d8, queen takes. I could try knight attacking your queen, so if you take my queen, I'll take yours and be a piece up. But he had this planned. Anyone for the move?
Queen f6.
you know, the rook takes d5.
Rook takes d5. Have to take it back with the rook, and you are a whole rook down. But very good. You now have two very strong pins. And you're sure to get back the exchange, but also the question is, will you have time for a pawn to f6 to win the knight? And very good. This actually works for black. You have to defend the rook on d5, so McCambridge brought the other rook into play. And now not taking right away, but Ethan just played pawn to f6, and his plan is he's going to win the exchange back by bishop takes rook, and then he's going to take the knight, and so he'll feel in good shape. And I looked at this position a bit, and certainly the players were looking quite a while, and there's just nothing to be done for the white side.
So this is the main line?
This is actually the game, yes. Which these you can see them on our site. These were on the DGT boards this weekend.
So we can see your commentary on our mechanics website?
Yes. Well, there's more action to come. Nothing really works. No moves like rook to here. Well, the queen will just take it. So McCambridge decided he had to just defend the knight so he'd at least get his pawn back when all the material got taken. So Ethan first took the exchange back.
You wouldn't have the pin on the knight, so the knight would be saved, right?
I'm sorry, are you saying instead of pawn to f4?
Rook to d6, queen takes rook, and then it would be
Rook to d6, queen takes rook. You can take the bishop, but I'll take your rook. You can take...
Queen, rook takes queen, and bishop takes queen, and the knight gets away. Oh, but then it's equal pawn. It's pawn, right?
And then, yes, if you... It's hard to keep track when you're giving a rook, a knight, and so you have to keep count very carefully at the end. Yeah, we took a whole rook, so it would be even. So pawn to f4, because white's a very strong player. International master of Vence McCambridge, been on the board of the mechanics for 20 years, and actually a former president of the institute. Bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, and Ethan takes the knight. If the rook takes the pawn, there's a queen check. So, yes.
He was powering up on the e-file.
And he took back. So material's now even, if you count, which is hard enough to do, just. But both sides have 5 pawns, a rook and a queen. And this is a nice passed pawn, advanced pawn. But now the white king is also a little bit loose. Queen to b6 check. King h1. And Ethan just was very aggressive. Right down queen to f2, threatening checkmate, threatening the pawn on b2.
How does he defend on rook f8?
You would do pawn to h3. Rook checks, king up, queen checks. You could also do rook to d1. It's also possible. But Ethan wanted this pawn. He had to defend against that, and queen takes b2, so black has gotten a nice pawn and has these wonderful pawns for the endgame. Yes, Mike?
Instead of doing h3, what happens on queen to b1?
Queen to b1, defending against the checkmate and such.
And defending the pawn as well.
And defending the pawn. You can do that, and that's okay. That's one thing. You lose a bit of control here. I think you're worried that white's getting a bad position with his pawn sacrifice, but that's not the case. Here, lots of things you can do. Maybe rook to f8 or queen to e2. You're controlling this critical area, and this pawn's kind of weak. So instead, it was better to say, all right, I'm just going to have a safe king. I don't have a back rank problem anymore. You get the pawn, but I've got this counterplay with my advanced passed e-pawn. And here came Ethan's one mistake of the game. He should just retreat, and then the rook would defend the pawn, and it's about even. Good compensation for a pawn because white's so centralized. No, well, that would be really greedy. I mean, I like the attitude, but he said, just give me a queen. I just have 2 steps to go, and I'm going to get a queen, and I'm going to get a queen with check. And here the game went, Vince with white played a very threatening move, and they analyzed it afterwards. That's the game continuation is quite interesting, except right here about, and maybe this happens to you, 1 or 2 hours after the game, he's sort of looking, thinking, he says, oh my God, I could win the game. So here's your puzzle to warm up for tonight, white to move and win. And this is a hard one, so I'm going to have to ask. Jerry, just guess a move for the white side, can you? Queen f4. It's, in the game, he actually played queen f5. That's a very good guess, and we'll get back to that. Queen e5 is a very good try. We actually analyzed that. It comes out.
I wondered if rook to e7 to d8 would win, but I'm not too sure of it.
Oh, rook d7.
Rook d7 is a very good move. Richard's suggesting rook to d8.
Yeah, I thought it could be followed by e7, but maybe the check would not allow white to finish
Bravo. It's actually the key move.
I'm guessing,
Just move a rook where he can take it.
I'm guessing that is E7, Queen E6 check, and then you can get to F7. Is that the idea?
You have to take the rook. There's no good choice. And even though the queen and pawn are so strong down here, it's one tempo slower. Pawn to E7 threatens not only the rook, but pawn up becoming a queen and checkmating. Yeah, because if you defend it, we queen, rook E8, and then check. And all of you are saying queen to F7. McCambridge was thinking queen to D7 about 5 moves back, or 6 moves back, and then he saw, oh, well, that's no good because of check, and check, and, but yes, that's what occurred to him 2 hours after the game. The queen F7 guards this square also, and there's no defense for black in this position. So unfortunately for McCambridge, that dawned on him a little too late. He played, the rook is on D6, yes. He played queen to F5, thinking also this was great, that queen to F7 is coming. If rook F8, you can just go rook to D8, followed by check and E7. And so he thought he was winning again, but here it was black's turn to play an astounding move.
What was the time situation at this point?
They both had a fair amount of time, maybe 20, 30 minutes. But we've got so much action today, unless anyone has a guess. Who said that? Okay, all these incredible moves you guys are getting in just half a minute. He just said, H6, please take my rook. Check. And then his king was safe. He took the rook, and it became perpetual check. So that was quite a great result for young Ethan. That's, having a lost position, but finding a great defense against an international master.
What was Ethan's rating?
He's what, about 2100.
So they gave me that draw. What happens
So
if you
that, yes.
take the rook?
Um,
Does he have another move besides taking the rook?
taking the rook.
Yeah, when you play, he's letting him have a draw by playing queen takes E8. So instead of playing queen takes E8, when the black queen is on B2,
Yes, queen takes E8,
Yeah, put the queen on F7.
queen on F7, yes.
the queen on F7 and the king on
Queen's
F8.
on B2, the black queen's on B2, right?
Queen's on B2, so it was check here, and you can go,
He's still there though, he's still on
The queen's
B2.
on B2.
queen's on B2, king's on H1.
Yeah, and the black rook is on E8. The black rook is on E8.
Oh, okay.
F7.
Sorry,
White makes a move to stop
And
the
so instead of taking the rook, does white have something to save, to still win?
the problem is anything like threatening checkmate, you can defend the checkmate and the pawn's coming, or with a queen.
Play queen F5
perpetual though.
Oh, okay, you could do queen check, although that's where you came from to start with. And I wouldn't go back to G8, I think I'd go to H8.
No,
And then I'm still guarding that square, so then I could probably play E7.
Pawn to E7, well, I could just push the pawn, I think. If the queen checks, I'll just move.
say E7, rook C6. Rook C, you instead of put the pawn on E6.
Queen check, I'll just move the king. So you want to go, instead of E7, you want to go
Rook C6.
rook c6. Yeah, but then I'm sure you can check, and if you get your queen back into the game, into the middle of the board, you're going to control a lot more. So white won't be able to do anything. If queen f7, a queen check, and they both have strong pawns. It's a very complicated position. I think after the game they sat and considered things for half an hour or an hour.
You couldn't play when the pawn was already on e7, and the rook was on e6 in the previous variation.
You were looking at this variation, check here, pawn to e7, king still on that square. So you have a choice. It's white's move. Yeah, if we give white 2 moves, he'll definitely win. But yeah, here we get a very powerful threat in 1 move.
Oh, wait a second.
You see a win for white?
I'm looking at rook takes h6 for a second.
That one I think I have to
No.
take.
You have to take it, then queen down, check.
Okay, king up, queen f7, queen back to g7.
Yeah, that just doesn't go. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot going on in this position.
Queen to, let's see, there's no time, queen to g6. Has it, no, then he has a,
Queens with check,
right, but, and he has a dark f4 he's given him.
or e5, check. Yeah, this game and another were really fantastic in this Addison Memorial. Just a quick wrap-up of other things going on in the chess world. Our man, Sam Shanklin, he's playing in the Summer Classic in St. Louis. He slowed down a bit after last year. He's got an even score there. They have 6 very strong grandmasters around 2,700. Lei Quim Liam is winning the tournament with actually only half a point ahead of Sam.
One last question. Okay, so what if you played rook d8 here?
Pawn queen check,
And then I still go to h2?
go to h2.
And then there's no check with the dark squares with the queen, and you can't take the rook, and I'm threatening to take the rook with mate.
Then I think yes, I can go queen back to c6, guarding the rook. Queen check, queen back guarding.
And rook takes, queen f8, you just play
Queen takes, and
pawn queens, and then it's check, and then we're back to the
black's a pawn up in the...
Yeah, okay, on that side.
Yeah. Yes, a lot of ideas, and I wanted to show Sam's 1 win in the game. This was against Darius Sverts. So it was a very long game, and he just got to an end game. Bishops of opposite color. And bishops on c4. So if you push this pawn, it's a blockade. If you push the pawn to f7, it's he just sacrifices the bishop. So this is an easy one. How would you win like Sam here?
King to h6.
King to h6. I'm just going to stay, keep my bishop here, and when you push the pawn, I just snap it off.
King to e7. Get through the king to e7.
Okay. Unfortunately, it takes. Yeah, it takes 2 moves. Maybe you can do this. I'm not sure. I'm then wondering if I can get your pawn to move to a dark square. Yeah, so maybe,
King E6, and how you stop the queen F8.
yeah, okay, that's very good. That wins tactically. That works. Sam was like, he was just wanting to be sure he got his half point and did sort of like what Mike did, but he made sure the bishop was here so that this one can never leave because of check, check. And then the bishop just moving back and forth. And then he slowly moved his king all the way down to here. And then moved the bishop back and then got the king to e7 as Mike wanted him to do. So that was his victory. His other games have been drawn, except for one game he messed up and lost. And then we had another you may find entertaining from last week's TNM, Hadrian Sablan against Jim Cohey. Won't go through that game. We'll just get to the key point. Pawns on b2, c3, b5. G2. H6. Rook on f1, rook on. Sorry. Right, king. G2, H2, rook on b4. D. E8. King on G8. King on and white has a queen. Queen on c7. So you're up a couple pawns and the exchange, but black to move. Charles, queen to f2 does everything. You can't take because of the background mate, but if you come back with the queen or the rook, there's the other mate to worry about on g2. So that move was really it. And in desperation, he tried queen to f7 because that was, but that doesn't really help any way you take it.
Take it with the queen. Oh, it's check.
It's check. It's check. Yeah, real desperation. It's, somehow you're hit with this queen to f2 move, and you say, "Oh my God," that's. Just something that threatens that much. But the queen. Otherwise, well, okay, I have a great game from the Addison, and I think I'll just show you the end of it. That tournament came down to this epic battle of Ezra Chambers against Kyron Griffith, and that it was deciding first place. In the end, Kyron won. He got clear first. Ezra managed to tie for second. But I think we'll just get to that final position, or yes, about 5 moves before the end, where Chiron had been winning the position, but they were getting very low on time.
Nick, can you tell me, who was Mr. Addison?
William Addison. Now he was he played in some interzonals, and he played with Bobby Fischer, many U.S. championships, and he was the director of the world famous Mechanics Institute Chess Club.
What years were these?
Sam, do you remember?
Mine is 1968 when I started.
And was William Addison director of the chess club then? I think he was in.
So, yeah.
It was something like 66 to 69.
Right, yeah.
The staff here has produced something on his background. I don't know what it was hanging there this week. Maybe you can see why or his background.
Played a few U.S. championships.
Yes, back then he was certainly one of the top 10 players in the country.
Is this the penultimate round?
Yes, the penultimate round was where all the action happened. In fact, Chiron made a very quick draw in the last round. So queen came to e5. White queen. I think it's here. Queen c2, king on d8, rook 1a7. Yes, it had just been oh well, there had been a check, and then the queen came to c2. Ezra Chambers had the white side, and black had been winning probably clearly before, but it'd been a very long game. They're both down to half a minute each, playing on the increment. White's threatening to take the rook, checkmate. You don't want to take this rook because he takes it check, and the queen and rook invade. And Chiron came up with a shot here. Rook takes the pawn on b3 with check. And there you're in time pressure, and you've taken the last pawn defending the black king, and it looks hopeless because if the queen takes the rook, well, you're going to have queen takes pawn check and rook takes rook on a8 with the queen getting that back, being 3 pawns ahead. But here Ezra played the cool-headed king to a2. And it's quite an amazing position. And just nothing around the king. This rook's here, but so much is happening. Well, you can give it 1 or 2. I'll give you the choice.
And they were doing this living off the increment?
Yes. Yeah. In a way, though, it's sometimes easy to play when you're desperate. Because you see, queen takes rook loses. There's no other move, and maybe this works. It looks so strange just to move your king out this way. But suddenly there's no checks on the white king, And you've got threats. See, you don't want, you can't go rook to b8 because he trades the rooks and the queen comes to c7 check. Followed by mate. And so he played rook to c3. Okay, guarding this, the queen guards. And again, it looks like black has everything under control. Now when the queen moves away, there's some checks and things. Nothing's guarding. If the rook takes here, you'll take with the king, and the black king would be safe. Pardon?
Rook to d7. Does that work?
Rook to d7. Well, actually I think the king can just take it, check, and then we'll just run away, even if you could win something. But he played queen to g2, which again, very shocking. You think, oh, these two rooks, the centralized queen, you've got to get the king. But amazingly, there's no good check. Well, we'll give him one at a time.
Why can't queen take that rook there? Right in front of it, right there.
Here, the black queen is guarding it.
Oh, that way, oh, that direction.
Yeah, not just this one, but very
Put queen back where it was.
queen back on c2. Okay,
Why can't it take that rook there? Because that,
take
here,
this.
that other rook is pinned.
Yes, but the
Oh,
queen
I see, I'm sorry.
queen can get it.
Okay, gotcha.
But actually, Jerry, you have just illustrated the point that I was going to ask everyone. Well, this looks like an overwhelming check, but as you pointed out, the queen can just take it because that one's pinned.
Yeah.
And there's no check with the black queen. The d5 is covered, a5 is covered, and meanwhile there's this threat of, yes, this side, the rook covers that, the queen swoops over on this. And suddenly Karan is in trouble, or certainly feels like he's in trouble. He should play rook to g3, and he's still at least equal. He did queen to g3, just trying to stop the invasion there. I mean, he's 2 pawns up. I mean, it feels like his king's better protected, but somehow these white pieces are swarming in. And Ezra came back queen to b2. Okay, he's stopping checks, still no checks, and he's ready to invade down here. So Chiron came back with queen to e5. So now he's not afraid of this check. The king can just run away. There's no time. And now this king is exposed because he'll have a queen to h2 check if given one tempo. And now we've been giving Ezra a lot of exclamation marks, haven't we? Yeah. But here he goes wrong with seconds on his clock. King is on d8, yes. And I'll show you the tragedy. He just didn't know what to do and just made a slow move, rook to b8, hoping the rook would take it or something. And then I'll actually show you the finish at that point. Then the queen was able to come over to the queen side, consolidate these squares, and rook takes check, takes with the queen, queen check. The king just ran away. The queen checked again, and the king just walked over to safety there. And I don't know if Ezra lost on time or resigned in this position, but he's 2 pawns down and probably getting mated here. But since we've given you so many puzzles already, don't mean to tire you out, but do like to see you warm up for your game. This is one of those positions, white to move and win. Okay, rook takes c8, very good, and we can't take it with the king because of queen to b7 check. So you would have to take it with the rook. Anyone for the second move? It was a white move with rook takes, black move, so this position's white to move.
So it's the ending after queen takes queen.
Oh, you could do that and get the pawn in the end game, but we want to win the game.
Queen, b7, and then queen d or e7.
You see, that would be really good that you lined up all this power. Unfortunately, black gets to move and will make a check. And yeah, probably start with rook c2. We may have king to b1. We may start off with a queen check and just kind of walk our queen closer, check, check, because there's nothing to guard here. Every move black makes is check, and it is going to win the game.
Okay, but now he has queen.
But
What about queen? The queen's on e1.
we had this position.
King's on e1.
Yeah, so queen to g2.
Yeah. So queen, yes, it is queen to g2, threatening checkmate. Rook c7 doesn't work because queen check, king d7, queen takes pawn. And you're threatening checkmate.
Regarding the checkmate.
There's still no checks. No rook check, no queen check, no queen check.
No queen on e2. I just wanted to use.
Well, we have a queen on g2. Guarding, yes. We would have given him 2 exclamation points for this. The only defense would be queen to h8, which is pretty good. You're staying on this diagonal. You're stopping that check. You could do rook f7, but actually you have quite a sequence. You can go check. You have to play f6. And still there's this queen h2 check to worry about. But surprisingly, if you do this retreat queen to d2, and even Ezra in time pressure, I think this would have been really tough to do. Surprisingly, this position is completely winning for white. You're threatening to take the pawn check and mate. If queen to f8, you actually block the king, so you get to go check, only decent move, and then queen check, and the king has to come back, and you do a mate. But that's, you can see that after the game if you have lots of time, and even then it's difficult to do. But that was Ezra's chance for glory to get more exclamation marks and win the tournament, but one slip. We have a bit more time, so I'm going to show you this fantastic game from last week's Tuesday night marathon. And
Can I ask you to look at all the games that are being played?
all the games?
You look at every game that's being played down to the time?
Actually, yes, we put them all in, and at least a brief look at them. Either Elliot and I will look. And if you have some specific comments or you think, wow, I played a really great game, a really interesting game, please just email us and we'll either comment or show it here. Pardon?
Isn't that torture for you?
Oh, if you play these astounding moves, it always entertains me.
Maybe with the question marks there.
Oh, yes, no. A mistake that allows some fantastic combination is very interesting to see. So, very interesting combinations came from Kyron Griffith against Alexander Ivanov. And I think we need to get right to the heart of the matter there. So the game started out a French defense, and then after bishop b4, it transposed into the boring exchange variation. All just symmetrical pawn structure, not much happening. What's that?
But it's the exchange winnow.
Kind of the winnow, a little, maybe a little more. Okay. But it's still an exchange variation. It's not as exciting. Or one doesn't expect it to be that exciting. Knight e7, knight f3, castles, knight e2. Bishop f5 exchanging off the active bishop. But knight to g3, bishop takes g3, queen takes g3. And maybe it would be good to develop a knight, but bishop to d6. And then Kyron starts the action. Okay, at least it's a threat of checkmate, you know. Could do. He played knight to g6, and oh, excuse me, I gave an extra tempo for white. The pawn had been on c6. But yeah, knight to g5 threatening mate, knight g6 threatening, and Kyron charges up with the f pawn. Which is sort of a little anti-positional to move that pawn up, but he's looking for threats. And Alexander makes a defense, rook e8, so that on pawn to f5, the knight gets to f8, guarding the pawn on h7. Still the pawn here is both a strength and a weakness, but you like that white has things out on the king side. And he goes up with pawn to f6, trying to break things up. So pawn to g6 is the most solid move, and maybe that pawn's attacking, but maybe can be a little weak. It's very double-edged. But Alexander takes that pawn because, well, it's a pawn, and you're pushing that knight back. It's, you've got all these developed. It looks safe on the king side. But then out of the blue, Kyron charges up with the knight on f5, sacrificing the knight on g5. So Alexander took it. And you wonder, what's the follow-up? Well, you've got a check here. But the problem is the king comes up attacking the knight. Sack that one too. Okay. Which he did. Congratulations. Now you're the one getting all the exclamation marks.
You can see the bigger fire.
Rook takes f7, so you've sacrificed 2 knights.
Queen checks on h3, followed by.
There is what's funny about this sacrifice is you still have these ones back in their original places. Elliot particularly looked at this position with a computer, and pawn to g4 threatening check in here is very good. In fact, the defense would be just bishop stopping, so that if the queen takes the
Plus, it's also threatening rook e1 check.
yes, there's that. I won't quite go into this. There's not time. It would have been this is quite a good move, but Chiron did queen check. I forgot who suggested it. King back, and the queen came to f5 check. So that's getting closer to the king. He had to go back. And yes, h4, which does look like just a winning attack. Well, pardon, what's that? Yeah, knight, if you move that knight, the h7 pawn goes.
Now you play rook e1 check.
Very good. An inspired defense from Alexander. That's what makes this game so good. You're big trouble over here. King f2. And then he takes the bishop. You have to get rid of one of the attackers over there. And actually, Chiron should have taken the rook, which just about anybody would do. Well, it sort of looked like a better move. He was inspired this game, and his 2 knights, whatever, bishop, rook.
Rook f6 check.
He played pawn to h5. He wants to take this pawn. The knight takes, and queen to g6, checkmate.
What was Chiron planning if Alex had played bishop to g3? I couldn't figure it out.
You mean after pawn to h5?
After h5, bishop to g3 check. Is that what was played? I didn't see it.
I think it should have been played. Let me get the notes.
I thought he played something else.
Queen f5 check, king h6. Well, if he had taken the rook on c1, then yes, okay, then it would have been somewhat better for white. But okay, he did h5, then came rook takes c2 check. But bishop g3 check here. Can I not just take it?
I was planning queen to d6 check. I haven't looked at this with a computer. I was just curious.
Okay, I think I think the end game might be good for. Oh no, you're sorry. You've stopped the mate, haven't you?
That's my plan.
Although rook f6 check is a very strong threat.
It was a strong threat before. I think you could block it a knight and he could play that.
Yes, sometimes you just win the queen.
And then take the rook. But you'd still be down material with white, I think.
But Brian's bishop g6 check is a defensive theme in the position. Well, yes. Actually, that's quite a good point. It's,
If you take the bishop out of check, you play queen up. Oh, I'm sorry, you were talking about maybe the
I would love to be spending at least half an hour on this game. I'm sorry, there's been so much great chess this weekend. But he played rook, this other deflection, since the rook was under attack. And in fact, probably Caron should have just ignored it, but he took the rook. And then queen came to e8. Queen came back to f5. And he gave a rook check on f6. So it turns out king g7 would actually be a pretty good move, but he took the rook. The queen took, knight to g6. Yeah, pawn takes followed by rook h1. Except that didn't happen because, and Brian has told you the move here for black. Now bishop to g3 check. And then if the king goes down, the rook can't get over. King up, there's the queen check. So he had to take it, and that allowed Alexander to check and get to an ending. Here, check, queen takes, pawn takes, yes, and black was better, but Caron managed to draw the ending. So I think he's still on the first board. Okay, thank you. Good luck tonight.